All right, welcome back on our journey to learning how to host a web page on a Windows Server or Windows 10 platform utilizing IIS and integrating PHP compatibility. Now we're getting into the web design aspect and how to handle the form data. And as you can see, I've loaded some files in here for a pretty basic web page, like a personal web page, where somebody might be able to go to a guest page and insert some form data, some information about them, and click submit, and then that submit button will divert to this PHP action page that I've created that tells Internet Explorer or whatever browser to send this information over to the SQL database and store it as relational data. And you can see here I still have my base index.html page, which matches up with my default page in IIS. I have a login page. I still have my PHP info page. I have a privacy page, and then the ones that we will be interested in for the most part is this form.html, which is a page that I have a form for visitors to go fill out, and actionpage.php. So to show you guys, as you can see here, I have that all loaded into the C initpub www root folder, where we originally saw the blue page and then hello world. And now if I navigate to that path again, and instead of designating a specific page, I just leave it at this /. It's going to pull back that index.html page. And you can see here we've got our real basic web page. Talks about some certifications, network certifications, and a few links up here at the top. And the one we're interested in is this guest book, and this points to the form.html page that we're going to be looking at. So if we load this up, we'll see here what this is going to look like to the end user. It's titled as a visitors log page, and they can input their user data. If you remember, I had talked about the first name, last name, and you'll see that these line up with the table data that we put into our database in SQL Server. All the way down to this tell me about yourself. So this is a pretty common form that you might find on any website. Now what we want to do, we'll go ahead and look at this form.html. So let's go ahead and edit this. And it'll bring up this HTML file that we have written. You'll see it's written in HTML, specify the language, get past all this head. The one thing to note here that's pretty helpful is loading a Bootstrap CSS, as well as I've linked it to this site.css. It specifies how the page is supposed to look. So you see this site.css, and it specifies how the page is supposed to look and how Internet Explorer is supposed to present the HTML. Then you get down past the header tags into the body. This is all the navbar information that doesn't really matter for this presentation. But here we get to the beginning of our form tag. And this opening tag, as you can see, it's created in a div bracket, and there are some field sets, which field sets allow you to separate different blocks of data inside of one specific form. And we've created an action to point to this action page.php that we were talking about earlier, that you can see here in the folder. So form, it points here to this action page.php. And just keep going through the form.html. You'll see first name, last name. This denotes a comment in HTML. So when the browser goes to read this, it will ignore this. It's there for essentially the developer to remind himself about what a section was about. And you see here, we get to our first input tag. And the label is this first name. If we go to our page here, you see the label of first name with those colons. And then an empty box where somebody can put in their information. And we specify that in ID and give it a name. So we specify this F name, which if you remember lines up with what we put for a table value into our relational database in SQL Server 2019. And we have first name, last name, email address, and you can see here some of the client-side validation that we've implemented. So we're not just relying entirely on server-side validation to make sure the information is what we want it to be. We can do that a little bit here so that they can't even send off the form if it doesn't match a few requirements. So we've given this an input type of email, which means that the browser is going to expect a proper email address, otherwise it will not let the user send it off to our database in the first place. Then we've given it a placeholder, which isn't universally accepted across all browsers, but it will give them an example of what you want them to type in here. Same thing here, and then you can specify, so for example, this phone number, we give it a placeholder to give them the text of what they should be able to put in there, and we put in a client-side validation of a pattern that we want. So we want the numbers 0 through 9 with a block of 3, so they can't put an area code with 4 digits in there, and then a hyphen, and then the value is 0 through 9, and they're going to put their first 3 digits of their phone number in there, and then finally their last 4. So this would be an example of an acceptable pattern for United States phone numbers, which is where we would expect our visitors to be from. And you can modify this based on your requirements, or just omit it entirely and then validate it on the server side. Another client-side validation, we expect a date to be input here, and this will also tell most browsers to display a calendar that the user can select their birthday from. And so we won't go through all of the different validations, other than you can see our certifications, and then we've given a value like we talked about earlier. So if the user, going back to our web page, scrolls down here, and you can see that this input type is a checkbox. So if they've got their CCNA, they can select that, and they can select Security Plus, or they can select Other and submit something into Other if they hold other certifications that they want to tell you about. These male and female, they're not checkboxes. If you look here, in the input type is a radio button, so they can select one or the other, and that's dictated by, since we specified it as a radio in our form, then they can select one or the other, and it's going to send a value of male or female based on which button they selected. As you can see here, our ID, other, that lines up with our database, and finally our About Me section that will line up with the About table in our database. And finally, at the bottom, we've got our submit buttons and reset buttons. So we get down to the end of this field set, and we have an input type of submit, which is going to refer back to that form where it sends it off to the action page, or they have the option to reset the form. So we've given them 2 different things they can do there. So when they click submit, if the client-side validation checks out, it will go to form. The action of sending it off to actionpage.php. And the actionpage.php written in a different language, which is why we went through this whole process in the beginning. And what that does is this PHP is processed on the server side. So HTML is a language that is processed entirely on the client side. When a client goes to a web page, they request the HTML, and then their browser interprets it and displays it in their browser window. In PHP, the information is processed on the server side, and in our example will be processed by the SQL Server database. And so what we see here is just like the PHP info. We have an opening tag of the question mark PHP, which tells the browser the language that this is written in. And our comments are a little bit different. It's the / asterisk, and here is our explanation of what this section does. So here we are going to connect to the MS SQL 2019 Express server using Windows authentication. And you can see here I have some different values than what we have currently in our SQL Server database. And that's because I created this on a different operating system, and these values worked for that. So we're going to change this to what we need. So we've got our server name. Let's go back here to our SQL Server, and we'll just go ahead and disconnect here so that we can see the values that we need. And we see that our server name is our device /db / /SQL Express. So very similar, and we're using Windows authentication for that as well. So we're going to go ahead and edit that in here to be our device DB / SQL Express, and that's telling our server name and our instance name. So since the user ID and password are not specified here in the variable that we create, then it will be attempted using Windows authentication, which is what we have our authentication set up for on the server side. So we go back to here, back to our action page, and we'll see our connection info stored in this variable in an array. So the database is web, and you would modify this. This was the same in my old database, but if you see here, our database is named web, and so that value would get input here in to our database. And then we want to accept a character set of UTF-8, and then the connection info, we're going to use our SQL Server Connect command. So this is our query language connection information, and we're taking our server name information that we had here. So you've got the device DB SQL Server Express, and then it takes your connection info, which is your web database, and it's going to use that to connect to this. After that, we've created an if-else statement here that is going to return information based on how that connection went. So if it returned everything was good, the connection was established on the screen, you will see connection established. And in my action page, I can redirect this to another web page if I don't want the user to see this connection established dialog. But for our development, we want to be able to see if the connection was established, or if it's not, then it will echo, which essentially means print on the screen that connection could not be established. And then your /n is going to get that reason, and you want to return the SQL Server errors. So why it's not able to connect so that you can fix the mistakes in your PHP page to get a good connection. And then finally, we are defining the query, which you can break this into multiple lines, and you can parameterize this information as well. But for simplicity's sake, using query language, which is insert into dbo.web, which is our table that we created. I'm going to go ahead and connect back here so we can see that database web, and we have our table here, dbo.web. So that's staying the same. Into that, we will have fname, lname, email, phone, birthday, gender, and let's go ahead and open this up to double check that all of these are lining up just like they're supposed to be. First name, last name, email, phone, birthday, gender, certs 1 through 4. So we need to delete this. This has changed across my different forms. There's a good reason we're checking this, and we have our reason and we have our about. So again, we've got fname, lname, make sure that all of these match: first name, last name, email, phone, birthday, gender, all the way through certification 4. Great, we get rid of the cert 5, we have reason, and we have about. So all of that's great. We will be getting that from our form data and saying insert into, and then we give it the values, and this is taking this post data. So when the HTML submit button is clicked, it posts this information. So you have different HTML actions. You've got your gets, your posts, and all of that. So when you get, you're asking for a web page or an image or something from a database, and when you post, you're sending that information off. And so it goes into this variable here, and we're telling it the value for first name, which is what they would have user input into that box, and a comma separated value. And so it will input, say the person's first name was George, this would equal George when they click that submit button. If this last name equals Costanza, then it would equal Costanza in this value when they clicked the submit button. And then finally, once all of that information is populated in the statement utilizing query language SQL Server query, then we're getting back if this information was properly put into the database. If there are no errors, then it will just go back with the connection established. If there are errors, I'm telling it on 3 lines that I want to display the error code, the the SQL state, the error code, and then the message that describes, it gives you a brief description of why that did not work. So one thing that we will most likely see as we execute this is that they cannot establish a connection because of authentication, because IIS is sending this information off, and in SQL Server 2019 we have not created the IIS user to be an owner for this database or this table inside this database. So we will check that as we get there. So let's go ahead and save this. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back here to our form data, and just go back to the home page, go to the certificate or the visitors log, and we'll just put in this information. So as you can see, these were the placeholders that I had in there, so it gives them an example of what they can put in there. And just for grins and giggles, let's put something in there that's not supposed to be in there. As you can see, some browsers, if it's not enabled, will not see, you won't have the calendar where you can select the date. We'll put in birth date. Select your gender. Select a reason for coming here. To find like-minded people, and you can actually a lot of times hit control and select multiple reasons too, but for this we'll just select to find like-minded people and something about me. And we've done our form. We're gonna click submit, and right now we see this client-side validation because the user didn't input what they were supposed to. Then it's not even letting them submit the form to our database or our server because there could be potentially unwanted script input in this to where they could get rights where they are not supposed to be. So we fixed that and we hit submit, and as expected we are getting an authentication error. We see this NT authority IUSR not liking our user. So the NT authority actually dates back to the old Windows NT days, that a service user is created. Even today it is created under this NT user in Windows. So that's just kind of a hint there that the service is not allowing the IIS to authenticate. So what we need to do is go in and fix that. So to fix that, we want to go in here into our database and security and users and create a new user with this name here. Give it a login name, and under user type we want to make sure it's a Windows user, and we want to give them the DBO schema. Hit OK, and we've created our NT authority IUSR. In roles and database roles, we want to assign them as a database owner. So type in NT, hit check names, select our NT authority user, hit OK, hit OK, hit OK, and make sure that that populated. Now we'll go back, resubmit, and now we've got our connection established. So that's great. We didn't get any error messages, anything telling us our form data wasn't liked. So let's go ahead and check on the SQL Server side and see what happened. So in here in the database, web, tables, we want to look at what we've got inside our table now. So we can go here, select the top 1,000 rows, and looky there. In our database now, we have an ID of 1, that IT Christos hack that put his information in there, and you'll see some nulls also. So that actually probably means I need to change some of the coding, since it received a null. If it didn't, it should get this blank box here because they did not check mark that box, and I believe that's because I didn't type anything into the other box. Update. I did fix my code so that we were not getting this actual null value for the other table. So just to update that. Here, I fixed my label for that other. Instead of having it be a checkbox, I just gave it a label of other so that value of that what the user typed in for the other ID went into the table, instead of sending off as a checkbox with no value. So there you go, quick fix for that. And just to go back over the action page, I stuck the other response in here, as well as after certification for, so that it was actually sending off the value into that input. So insert into, and then the other, and then I included that in the values there. So problem fixed on that. One thing that we can do here to demonstrate, if we do want to, in here in SQL Server database, just look at certain information or from a certain person, then we can select, we'll just say all, so the asterisk, just saying that it wants all of the entries from the web table. And here's your autocomplete, your web database, where so we'll just say where fname equals curious. Go ahead and select and execute that, and now all we get back is this entry where the first name is curious. And there's a lot of different queries that you can do to select the information. You can just select the tables that you want. So I could say where first name curious, and just output the phone number and email for him, and maybe the certifications that he's got. Alright, so that pretty much sums up this series of the video. If you have any questions or any comments, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments section. And next up, we are going to look at how do I take this information now, and for security's sake, I want my database on a different server than my web host. So now, just keep in mind that in these videos that we have one server that is hosting our database and our web platform. So it's really easy for this to utilize Windows Login to send that information across the host and have it populate into this table. So our next video, we're going to look at how to separate those two applications for security purposes, where I can have my web server in a DMZ that people on the internet can access, and my web database on a different subnet that users do not have access to, and still be able to have those two communicate and send information to each other in a secure manner. So thank you for staying with me for this video. Please, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe and share this to all your friends, and come back for the next video. Have a great one.